I went to a concert upstairs in Town Hall. The composer whose works were being performed had provided program notes. One of these notes was to the effect that there is too much pain in the world. After the concert, I was walking along with the composer, and he was telling me how the performances had not been quite up to snuff. So I said, well, I enjoyed the music, but I don't agree with that program note about there being too much pain in the world. He said, what? Don't you think there's enough? I said, I think there's just the right amount. One day, I asked Schoenberg what he thought about the international situation. He said, the important thing to do is to develop foreign trade. Once I was visiting my Aunt Marge. She was doing her laundry. She turned to me and said, you know, I love this machine much more than I do your Uncle Walter. When the Depression began, I was in Europe. After a while, I came back and lived with the family in the Pacific Palisades. I had read somewhere that Richard Bulig, the pianist, had years before in Berlin given the first performance of Schoenberg's Opus 11. I thought to myself, he probably lives right here in Los Angeles, so I looked in the phone book, and sure enough, there was his name. I called him up and said, I'd like to hear you play the Schoenberg pieces. He said he wasn't contemplating giving a recital. I said, well, surely you play at home. Couldn't I come over one day and hear the Opus 11? He said, certainly not. He hung up. Then about a year later, the family had to give up the house in the Palisades. Mother and Dad went to an apartment in Los Angeles. I found an auto court in Santa Monica, where in exchange for doing the gardening, I got an apartment to live in a large room back of the court over the garages, which I used as a lecture hall. I was 19 years old and enthusiastic about modern music and painting. I went from house to house in Santa Monica, explaining this to the housewives. I offered 10 lectures for $2.50. I said I will learn each week something about the subject that I will then lecture on. Well, the week came for my lecture on Schoenberg. Except for a minuet opus 25, his music was too difficult for me to play. No recordings were then available. I thought of Richard Bulig. I decided not to telephone him, but to go directly to his house and visit him. I hitchhiked into L.A., arriving at his house at noon. He wasn't home. I took a pepper bough off a tree and, pulling off the leaves one by one, recited, he'll come home, he won't, he'll come home, etc. It always turned out he'll come home. He did, at midnight. I explained I'd been waiting to see him for 12 hours. He invited me into the house. When I asked him to illustrate my lecture on Schoenberg, he said certainly not. However, he said he'd like to see some of my compositions, and we made an appointment for the following week.